There are ballparks in America where the visiting team feels the weight of history the moment they step off the bus. Busch Stadium in St. Louis is one of them. This is not just a baseball stadium. This is a cathedral. The home of 11 World Series championships. The house that Stan Musial built, that Bob Gibson made legendary, that Albert Pujols turned into the most celebrated sluggers stage of the modern era. Cardinal red runs through this city like a second bloodstream. St. Louis does not simply love baseball, St. Louis is baseball in a way that very few American cities can honestly claim. So when Shohei Ohtani arrived here, in enemy territory, wearing Dodger blue, the color that St. Louis has been conditioned to resist, what happened next was something that no one in the city had quite prepared for. The crowd did not boo. They cheered. Not politely. Not with the restrained appreciation that fans sometimes offer a great player on the opposing team. They cheered the way they cheer for their own. They held up signs. They pressed to the railings. They called his name. And the legends of this franchise, men who spent their entire careers building the identity of Cardinal baseball, stood up and said things that no one expected them to say about a player in Dodger blue. Albert Pujols, the greatest Cardinal of his generation, looked at Ohtani and said something simple and devastating: Shohei is a baseball treasure. And in St. Louis, when Albert Pujols speaks about baseball, the city listens. To understand what happened when Ohtani arrived in St. Louis, you first need to understand what Busch Stadium represents in the fabric of American baseball. There are cities in this country where baseball is entertainment. There are cities where it is tradition. And then there is St. Louis, where baseball is closer to religion than either of those things. The Cardinals have not simply been a successful franchise. They have been a consistent standard. Decade after decade, through changing rosters and changing eras, the Cardinals have maintained an identity built on a very specific kind of baseball. Disciplined. Fundamental. Loyal. The city reflects that identity back at the team, and the team reflects it back at the city, in a loop that has been running for over a century. Players who come through St. Louis as visitors understand this immediately. The fans know the game. They know when a play is made correctly and when it is not. They know what a proper at-bat looks like. They know the difference between a player who is physically gifted and a player who understands baseball at a deeper level. This is what makes what happened when Ohtani arrived so significant. St. Louis fans did not cheer Ohtani because he is famous. They did not cheer him because of his contract or his marketing appeal or his face on billboards across Los Angeles. They cheered him because they recognized, with the unsentimental, educated eye that Cardinals fans have developed across generations, that what they were watching was different. That the player standing in their stadium, wearing the wrong color uniform, was doing something with the game of baseball that they had never quite seen before. And in St. Louis, that recognition means something that it does not mean everywhere else. The atmosphere before first pitch was already unusual. In the hours before the game, outside Busch Stadium, something rare was happening. Dodger fans had made the trip, that much was expected. But mixed among them, wearing Cardinal red, were fans holding Ohtani merchandise. His name on their backs. His face on their signs. Not ironically. Not as a joke. But with the genuine, uncomplicated enthusiasm of people who had decided that on this particular night, in this particular stadium, the rules of rivalry could wait. Inside the park, when Ohtani emerged for batting practice, the reaction was immediate. A section of the crowd moved toward the railing. Phones came out. Children who had been watching Cardinal baseball their whole lives pointed and said his name. And veterans of the game, coaches, scouts, former players who have spent decades in this sport and do not impress easily, stopped what they were doing and watched. There is a quality to Ohtani's presence on a baseball field that is difficult to describe accurately without sounding like exaggeration. But people who have been around elite athletes their entire professional lives say the same thing, consistently: there is a difference between watching a great player warm up and watching Ohtani warm up. The difference is not just physical. It is not simply the arm strength or the bat speed or the size of the man. It is the quality of attention he brings to every single repetition. The way he approaches a batting practice swing with the same focus that other players reserve only for the ninth inning of a tied playoff game. The completeness of his investment in every moment on the field, even the moments that, by conventional baseball logic, should not matter. Cardinals fans recognize that quality immediately. Because it is the same quality that their franchise has always demanded of its own players. And seeing it in someone wearing Dodger blue created a tension in the stadium that resolved itself in the most unexpected way possible, with St. Louis simply deciding to love him anyway. Albert Pujols does not offer compliments casually. This is a man who hit 700 home runs in the major leagues. A man who won 3 MVP awards, 2 World Series championships, and spent over 2 decades as one of the most feared hitters in the history of the game. Pujols has been around greatness, has been greatness, in ways that give him a measuring stick that very few people alive possess. So when Pujols looked at Ohtani and called him a baseball treasure, it was not a polite comment made for the cameras. It was an evaluation. A precise, considered judgment from someone whose entire life has been built around understanding what the game demands at its highest level. What Pujols specifically identified in Ohtani was not the two-way ability, though he acknowledged it as unprecedented. What struck him, by his own account, was the consistency. The fact that Ohtani does not have days where he coasts. He does not have appearances that feel like maintenance. Every time he steps onto a baseball field, regardless of the stakes or the opponent or the travel schedule or the accumulated weight of a long season, he brings the same standard. Pujols knows what that costs. He knows because he maintained a version of it himself for the better part of 2 decades, and he knows how much discipline it requires. How many choices it demands that have nothing to do with baseball directly: what you eat, how you sleep, how you manage your energy, how you protect your focus in a world that is constantly trying to take it from you. Shohei is a baseball treasure, Pujols said. And what he meant, beneath those 4 words, was something more specific. Here is a player who treats the gift of his ability with the seriousness that very few people ever do. Here is a player who has decided, not once, but every single day, that the standard will not drop. That the preparation will not be shortchanged. That the game deserves his full self, every time, without exception. In St. Louis, where that standard has been the cornerstone of a franchise's identity for over a century, those words landed with the full weight of everything they carried. The reception that Ohtani received in St. Louis confused some people in the baseball media. This was the enemy. This was a Los Angeles Dodger, the franchise that St. Louis has competed against and battled throughout baseball history. The correct response, by the traditional logic of sports rivalry, was resistance. Polite acknowledgement at most. Certainly not the kind of open, unreserved embrace that Busch Stadium offered on the night Ohtani arrived. But that analysis misses something important about the culture of Cardinals baseball specifically, and about what Ohtani actually represents to people who love the game at its deepest level. Cardinals fans are not simply loyal to the uniform. They are loyal to a way of playing. A set of values about how the game should be approached, with preparation, with discipline, with respect for the craft, with humility that does not diminish confidence but keeps it from becoming arrogance. These values are woven into the identity of the franchise, and they are what Cardinals fans have always responded to most strongly, not in their own players alone, but in any player, anywhere, who embodies them visibly enough to see. Ohtani embodies them completely. And in a city whose baseball culture is sophisticated enough to recognize that, even when the player in question is wearing blue, the response was never really in doubt. The cheers in Busch Stadium were not a betrayal of Cardinal loyalty. They were an expression of it. A recognition that the thing they love most about baseball, the thing the Cardinals have always represented, was standing on their field in a different uniform, and that was worth celebrating regardless of who was going to win the game. Pujols used the word treasure. And it is worth sitting with that word for a moment, because it is more precise than it might initially appear. A treasure is not simply something valuable. It is something that belongs, in some essential way, to everyone. It is something that transcends ownership. You can possess a treasure, but you cannot privatize what it means. The value of a treasure is distributed, it enriches everyone who encounters it, regardless of which side they are on. That is what Ohtani has become in baseball. Not simply the property of the Los Angeles Dodgers, not simply a symbol of Japanese excellence, not simply the subject of the largest contract in the history of professional sports. He has become something that belongs to the game itself. A reference point. A standard. A living demonstration of what the sport can be when a player of exceptional natural ability decides to honor that ability with the kind of preparation and conduct that most players never sustain consistently. When Pujols said, "A national treasure has arrived," and those words spread through St. Louis and beyond, he was not speaking as a Cardinals legend commenting on a Dodgers player. He was speaking as a man who has spent his entire life in the game of baseball, recognizing something in Ohtani that the game itself has rarely produced. And St. Louis, the city that understands baseball perhaps better than any other in America, heard exactly what he meant. Games end. Scores are recorded and forgotten by most within weeks. But moments, genuine moments, the kind that baseball still produces when no one can quite manufacture them in advance, those stay. What Ohtani gave St. Louis on the night he arrived in enemy territory was not a performance in the conventional sense. It was not a home run that cleared the bleachers or a strikeout that silenced the crowd. What he gave the city was a reminder. A reminder that the game of baseball, at its best, is still capable of producing a player that nobody owns. A player who belongs, in some way that cannot be fully explained, to everyone who loves what the sport can be at its highest level. Busch Stadium cheered for a Dodger. Albert Pujols praised a player who played for the other side. And in doing so, St. Louis gave the baseball world something that rivals and opponents rarely give each other, an honest, uncomplicated recognition that greatness is worth honoring wherever it appears, regardless of what color uniform it happens to be wearing. Ohtani arrived in enemy territory. By the end of the night, there was no enemy territory left. There was only baseball. And the man who, right now, plays it better, and more completely, than anyone alive.